Teachers hear a lot of nonsense, but this answer is the absolute peak of stupidity. You won't believe what this student said. When teaching at the University of Chemistry, the students were given the task to write an answer in the form of an essay. I don't remember what topic it was. Other animals were very sorry for him, and they really wanted to be friends with him. But the problem was that when the dragon was happy, he burned everything around him. This whole story took him 3 or 4 pages, after which the story abruptly broke, and he still tried to answer the task. And I'm still worried about the question, did the dragon find friends in the end? Poor thing, I hope he didn't hurt anyone. How did you rate his work? Did you give him points for the story? I rated only was related to the task. His story did not affect the rating in any way. Name 3 different gases. The answer is air, fart, gravity. Oh yes, gravity is the heaviest of all gases. On the test on thermodynamics, the students had to write what adiabat is. One student answered a woman who needs insulin. In my opinion, I put half a point for the effort. Everyone needs insulin, just diabetics cannot produce their own. I remember we had a test on Chinese symbols, on which it was necessary to write a definition for tu tu, jezoi. This is a proverb, which is translated as even a school dog can learn to read and write in 3 years. But one student translated it as if you haven't figured out something in 3 years, then you're dumber than a dog. Maybe he did it on purpose. I'm taking an oral exam in French. The girl wanted to say, I traveled by plane, but she said, I was harassed on the plane. Oops. Controlled in Japanese. The student wrote instead of the answer, I don't know anything. I'm sorry, I didn't study. I disgraced my whole family and my cow. And next to it, she drew the saddest cow, which can only be imagined. Changed. If anyone doesn't know about a family and a cow, this is a reference to Mulan. However, Mulan was Chinese. Changed too. There was also a task where they had to rewrite Japanese numbers with Arabic numbers. Well, like 1, 2, 3. One genius wrote the whole task in Roman numerals. At first I laughed, but then I wanted to finish it. But since the purpose of the task was to show the understanding of Japanese numbers, he coped with it. Although in such a moronic way, I had a student who gave me a code in which there were obscene comments. I had to have a serious conversation with him about professionalism. Only I didn't tell him what hell was in the code of my high school. I'm not a teacher, but I take driving exams. I asked the question, what is the penalty if you don't stop when you are stopped by the police? The students answer, if you go fast enough, then no. 3rd grade. I asked the students to write the definition of several words. One of the words was parents. When I taught in the 1st grade, every week we learned new words. Once we talked about the word power, and I asked the children to give an example of something powerful. Most of the children answered the president and the superhero, but one said, infants. I'm like, why? Infants have power because they can cry and get whatever they want. It looks like someone has a younger brother or sister. Librarian. Who will tell me what Martin Luther King Jr. was famous for? Kindergarten teacher. He told people about their colors. When I taught in the 1st grade, teacher. What everyone loves George Washington for? Classmate. One of the children answered the question with a trick. Australia does not exist. I hope you're an Australian. Ha! Australia does not exist. But Kevin, we live in Australia. The existential crisis is intensifying. Not a teacher. Once I didn't prepare for the exam at all and left almost all the answers blank. The last question was the only one I answered. I should have studied better. I hate myself now. My teacher wrote down not bad and gave the maximum score for this question. Then, by the end of the year, I was already well prepared. Hokku is the most overrated thing in the history of literature. I remember when we studied Hokku, I said, and what is all this? In the last lesson, you promised us something grandiose, but here it doesn't smell like anything. This form of poetry is very poorly translated into English. Believe me, in Japanese, Hokku makes much more sense. Question. No one raised their hand, so he chose some random chick and asked her to answer. He thought a little and gave it out. Well, at least a couple of 10s, right? The teacher sighed sadly and answered, well, yes. I teach children up to school age, more precisely 2 years old. Sometimes I give them cards with pictures and ask them what is depicted on them. Once they got a card with a gallon of milk. I ask, where does it come from? Right away, one of my favorites shouts, Mommy, milk comes from mommy. In principle, he was right. Taking a biology exam. The topic is frogs and groundwater. Task: name a few ways how to save frogs from extinction. Answer: it is necessary to ban French restaurants. Perhaps not the most outstanding and effective way to protect frogs, but purely technically, he is right. This was the answer of one of my classmates. When the teacher emphasized him as wrong, we went to complain that he changed his decision. Question: can you explain the consequences of the attack of the Germans on the Netherlands in 1940? Answer: no. The technical answer, yes, is also correct. In fact, the teacher made the question wrong. Controversy in higher mathematics. Task: write Simpson's formula. Oh, one of my students had a cool answer. I'll just start with clarification. In our country, if 70% of the class fails the test, then everyone should write it anew, and the magazine has the best rating out of 2 attempts. Once, we had a test that everyone failed, except for one guy who wrote to the maximum score. Naturally, when rewriting, he could no longer improve his grade. So he wrote a cheesecake recipe. I was not lazy. I prepared it. And it turned out to be just awesome. This is in what country such a topic? I don't know where the author is from, but we had the same in Germany. True, 5 years ago, everything changed. I had one professor whom I hated. I redirected his letter to the dean, to which the dean replied that technical Roman numerals are still a viable type of enumeration. The professor had to check my work. I got a 5 with a minus. Once someone drew a dinosaur and then tried to erase it. True, it looks like he had a very bad eraser. The dude almost erased the sheet in the dust in an attempt to erase the traces of this terribly drawn dinosaur. Another time, someone wrote an anecdote in a very small font. There were also cases when they openly licked me, like, snooze. You're so awesome that I would happily bake a cake for you. By the way, can you give me a normal rating? Sorry, by the way, info for everyone who is in the university now. My dad once told me that one of his students complained that they did not pass what was in the question. The question was whether it was possible to get pregnant from a handshake. This is the first course of medical school. It's like a trick question, like, it can't be that simple. There must be some hidden answer. Like, is it still possible to get pregnant under some crazy circumstances? One of my teachers told me that when she checked the 12th grade exam, one of her students wrote instead of SC. I don't get into this topic, but here's a bird for you. After that, he drew a real bird. If he handed in an empty sheet, he would get 0%. Is it stupid? Yes, but these were the rules. So draw a bird, guys. You never know when it will come in handy. I'll give you an example of my stupid answers. At school, we had one such meme with our peers. In short, we wrote either 42, or 6, or Jesus. Once we had a physics test that I wasn't prepared for at all, which I decided to write these 3 answers. The joke is that I answered one of the questions almost correctly. Once, I also wrote Jesus as an answer. When I got the work back, it said I will accept this answer in the first and last time. Question: who is called the father of the founder of America? Answer: George Walker Bush. He guessed with George, so you can give him 1/3 of the point. I'm not a teacher, but I know one guy who wrote his name. I'm also not a teacher, but in the 7th grade, we had a grammar test. There were 10 questions. You could get 3 points. I filled in all the questions and forgot to sign the work. I got -3 out of 30. I teach at a school where students study on iPads, and all the work we have, respectively, is also written in digital form. So on one test, some student, instead of the answer, put an emoji with a pizza. I don't even remember what the question was there, but I remember the answer well. I teach English in China. We study professions. I ask the class a question. Who do you want to become? The answer is a model student in all seriousness. I want to become a potato. He taught French. One day he gave his students a task where they had to translate the text into English. I don't know what the student had in mind, but the sentence. She walked along the street with a bearded mat. He translated how she walked down the street with a bearded mattress. Seriously? A mattress? A sailor is not a mattress. I work as a physics and biology teacher. The funniest answer. I. Name any source of protein. Student. Duck nose. The dumbest answer. I. Why do we see lightning earlier than we hear? Student. Because the sound moves slower than the noise. Thank you very much for watching. In the comments under the video, if you are a teacher, write the dumbest answers you receive from a student at a test or an exam. And if you are a student, write the dumbest answers you wrote that you passed. And don't forget to watch our other videos. Bye. I'm leaving.